All right, hello everybody. Want to record a quick video to explain kind of what the research project is. It's a relatively big part of the grade, and it's one that people tend to either do really well or to do kind of poorly. And so this video is to hopefully remedy the reasons that people do this poorly. So in terms of next steps, what we're going to be doing is moving from kind of the interest area paragraph or paragraphs and the research question and rationale. So what we need to start to do is to think about your sources a little bit more. And when I say thinking about sources, we're looking at the raw materials that we're going to use to build an essay. So the research project is not an outline, it's not a rough draft, it is laying the foundation for your essay. So I like to start this with a little bit of an analogy. So what does French toast have to do with research? Which I'm borrowing from a friend, colleague Katie Johansson. So the answer is nothing. Actually, I'm just kidding. So what we want to think about is what ingredients do we need to make French toast? And so, the usual answers are things like bread, milk, eggs, cinnamon, something like that. Now, the thing is, we can have those separate ingredients, but if you came to my restaurant and you ordered French toast and I just brought you eggs, milk, and toast, that would not be French toast. What I need to do is I need to combine those ingredients. So rather than just providing my audience with the raw materials, I want to start to think about how I can use those materials together. So as you're researching, I would encourage you to think about how can I use these different articles together. Now, I'll reiterate this several times, but for the research project, you need 5 academic sources. Those are peer-reviewed sources, so make sure that you understand the difference between a popular source and an academic source. So, moving into the actual research project, right? How do we combine those ingredients to make something new? What we're essentially doing is starting to pick our ingredients, but again, we're picking those ingredients with an eye towards that combination. So the research project is the first major assignment. It's worth 60 points. And that essentially breaks down into 2 chunks, right? So they kind of think of it as 2 smaller assignments together. And if you're interested, I can explain why I'm putting those 2 together rather than have 2 separate assignments. So in terms of the research project, there are 2 parts. One part is the research proposal, which I use my own version of a research proposal, my proprietary version. So don't just Google research proposal because it's potentially going to be different than what I'm asking you to do. So just go by the description. This is one of the few assignments where I lay it out for you, and I really just want you to follow the bullet points as you go. So the first part is a research proposal. The second part is an annotated bibliography. So those are each worth 30 points. So 30 plus 30 gets 60 points. Now, if you haven't done an annotated bibliography, don't worry. I'm going to cover that here in a minute. But for all intents and purposes, this is one assignment, and you are going to turn it in as one file in Canvas. If it is done well, you're going to have a really good game plan for your essay, and you're going to have all the material kind of there already, and you can add some additional stuff as you go, but it's going to give you a really good starting point. Now, in terms of approach, even though when you turn this assignment in, it's going to be proposal and then annotated bibliography, so proposal and then bib, I do recommend that you do the annotated bibliography portion first when you're working, and then just paste it underneath your proposal. Now, the reason for that is you're going to have all that information, all of the research to help you along. Part of the research project asks you to do a literature review. And a literature review is not simply a summary of what you found. It's a sort of overview of the discussion that's happening on your topic. So let's say I'm talking about, or, my research is focusing on why people like books and movies about the apocalypse. My literature review is going to say, some people are saying this, other people are saying this, here's where they agree, here's where they disagree, right? So it should be relatively specific within that framework. And if you're curious of what that looks like, go ahead and look at the example, which I believe is in, if it's not in this week's module, it will be in next week's module. So again, the annotated bib, and if you've never done one of these before, that is okay. Again, I have a very specific way I want you to do the annotated bibliography, so please do pay attention. So the goal here is to evaluate sources and how they can be used. So I think about it as reliability and usability. How reliable are your sources? Why do you trust them? And how can you use them? So let's break this down a little bit more. So all 5 sources must be academic or peer-reviewed or scholarly. Remember, those 3 words we're using interchangeably. So not from a newspaper or a popular source. One should be a book, although I'm flexible on that. So if you don't find a book, that's fine. If you do, great. It's not going to harm you one way or the other. Just know that I do count books as an academic source so long as they are not self-published or something like that. So one should be a book. It's not a necessity, and it's not going to lose you any points if you don't use a book. For each source, you're going to create the correct MLA 8 works cited citation. Now, that means that when you get to writing your paper, you've already got those MLA works cited citations, and you can copy and paste them over and just leave the annotations out. It also means that if there's an error in your citations, I will be able to catch those and you can fix them for your paper, which means you won't lose points on the paper for the MLA part. Your citation itself is going to be followed by a 100-word minimum, 100-word evaluation of the source and its uses. Now, there are 4 questions that I want you to address there, and I'll cover those on the next slide. But the goal here is not a simple summary. So I don't want you to just summarize the source. I want you to actually answer the questions and evaluate the source. The reason for this is I want to see your thought process as you're choosing your sources. Why did you choose a specific source, and how or why do you trust it? Now, I'm not going to ask you to do annotations for the paper, so you're good there. You only have to do this one annotated bibliography. So any other sources you use, you're not going to need to create an annotation. Additionally, sometimes students ask, if you find more than 5 sources, you don't have to do an annotation for the additional sources. If you want to include some popular sources, that is fine with me, so long as you have 5 academic sources. Now, in terms of the annotation breakdown, they should be written in complete sentences, not bullet points, so it needs to be kind of a paragraph. But I want you to address 4 questions. Number 1, what's being addressed in the article? What is that article about? What's the author's perspective and potential bias? Now, again, a lot of people lose points because they'll say the author is a professor, so they don't have bias. We all have biases. If you can find a bias or you suspect a bias, put that into the annotation. If you can't find a bias, it's okay to say, I'm not sure that there's a bias here. However, if the article is by a psychology professor who specializes in early childhood education, and the article is about the benefits of early childhood education, we could say that author, that professor, is probably biased towards the benefits. Okay, so even though they're a professional, they still might have some biases, and that's just what we want to look out for. Again, think of this as practicing assessing bias. I want you to think about how you can use the information to support your research question. So again, why did you choose this specific article? What information there can you use? So another error that people do or that I see is people say, I don't think I would use this in a paper. Well, if you don't think you would use the source in a paper, it probably shouldn't be in your annotated bib. You should go find another source that you think is useful. Think about it like our French toast example. If I was writing a recipe for French toast and I said, well, and you could also have a jar of spaghetti sauce. You don't want to use the spaghetti sauce, but it might be nice to have it. Well, if I'm not going to use the spaghetti sauce in making French toast, then why even bother kind of buying it or getting it out of the pantry? And then the last thing is some gaps in the article where you think things are missing. And in this too, if you read the assignment description, I do want you to talk a little bit about the author's reliability. So why is the source reliable? Again, I know that you're probably finding these things through Academic Search Complete, but what is it about the specific source that makes it reliable? And the reason that I'm having you do this, although I know you're going to find most of your sources through Academic Search Complete or Academic Search Premier, is that I want you to practice that assessment. So I want to see your thought process. Now, some basic reminders. It does need to be, your annotations do need to be well written in a fluid paragraph. The goal is to consider usefulness and reliability. So reliability, usability. It doesn't need to be completely useful, but there must be some use for it. If you're just saying, hey, this is a 30-page article, I didn't read the whole thing, but I found this one chart that's really useful that can help me make a point, great. Now, in terms of that, and I just mentioned that some of these are 30 pages, you do not have to read all 30 pages. So let's say the average length of an academic article is, say, 20 pages. I have no real idea, but let's just say 20 pages. 5 sources would mean you would theoretically be reading 100 pages of text. And that is dense, usually rather technical text. You don't have to read every word of every article, and I wouldn't expect you to. What I would suggest is that you read the abstract or introduction, the first little part, skim the body of the article, kind of paying attention to any charts, graphs, images, then read the conclusion or methodology or next steps or whatever they're ending with, and then answer those 4 questions, right? What's the question the article addresses? What's the author's bias and credibility? Are there any gaps in the source, and how could you use it? And then you'll have a solid annotation, and you can basically justify those sources that you're using. Okay, so I am going to jump forward here a little bit for the sake of time. Moving from the annotations to the literature review should be organic, and this is why I'm saying to do the annotated bib first. The literature review is kind of big picture, so what you're going to want to do is think about what are the overall themes, trends, things that come up in your articles, and then look at the big picture. So again, you are not simply summarizing the articles, neither in the annotated bib nor in the literature review. So let's just real quick look at one, and then I'll end this video and I'll do a second one for the other part of the research project. So here's an example from a student several years ago. So we can see here they've got their MLA Works Cited, and then they start out with the author. Etta Olis is the author of White Fantasy, White Betrayals on Neoliberal Feminism in the U.S. Presidential Election Process, published by Ephemery, etc. Olis is a lecturer at the University of Leicester and specializes in psychoanalysis. So that helps, right? So we've got the article, and we've got who the person is. The source is published on Ephemera, an open access journal where intersectionality is discussed by other authors. Now, I would say this is a pretty good one. There are a few things missing. Number one, we haven't specifically addressed bias of this author, Etta Olis, and we haven't specifically said how we could use this source. So what I'd be looking for here with this student would be, great, what are you going to use this specific article for? Is there a specific quote, chart, statistic that you like that you think you might use? I'm not holding you to it. It's not a contract. So if you don't, if you right now you think you would use it for something and later on you scrap this source, you find a different source, you use a different part of the source, that is fine. It's just to get you a little bit of a starting. Okay, so that's the bulk of the annotated bib, just to give you a little bit of an overview. I'll go ahead and end this video here. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.